Hey everyone, so today we have come up with a new video for our series Ichigai and his quest for Zen. And today we will look at this topic code that will run everywhere, for short Docker. So let's jump right into the problem first. So this is what happened. When I joined the company, I was given a task, and in this task we were three team members that were working. Now what happened was that everyone had to first set up the service on their local machine to get the development up and working. Now what happened was that there was an existing code and we were using this service. So first of all, setting up this service was very difficult. The Java versions wouldn't match. The Gradle dependency, sometimes it will Maven dependency would sometimes it would pick from cache. Sometimes the ID won't work. So getting started on the task became very difficult to do that first initial development, and the problem kept continuing because whenever someone push some features, now when someone push some feature on the same branch, others code stop working. So we had to do a lot of back and forth communication to get the code to keep the code running. Another problem, now the problem became even worse when we had to now touch six microservices. So we had to do changes in the six microservices. Now the problem becomes six times, right? Another problem was that now the services are not just Java code. They depend on some other infrastructure. Like they may use Kafka for queuing, they may use Redis for caching, they may use the MySQL DB. Now setting up all this on local machine, it was very difficult. And what ended up happening was that everyone started connecting to the stage DB, stage machine, stage Kafka to get the things moving. And now what they would get the initial setup done, but what happened was that any change in their code, they will by mistakenly make some changes in the DB also, or infrastructure also, and now everyone who is using the stage, the things will break. So to alleviate all this problem, we started looking for a solution to how to make a dev environment so that everyone can set up any service with just one command. So they don't have to install anything, and it just works, something like that. So Docker and Docker Compose came to the rescue. So let me first explain to you what Docker is. If you came right from the college, or if you don't have any prior experience with Docker, so think of it like this. Uh, I'm sure you must have used this Ubuntu virtual images like VirtualBox, VMware images. So what happened was that the Ubuntu image would already be there. Now you will install some things on it, and suppose if you are working on a OS compiler course, you will install some GCC++, you will install some Linux building tools on top of it. And now what your professor would do is that he will take this image and they will distribute to all of the candidates for the assignment. So you didn't have to do all the setup part, and the professor was sure that if it's working on his machine, it will work on your machine. So that is a similar logic that we use for deploying these microservices also. So in this tutorial, these are the things that we will look at. So how to get all the databases services up running with single command, how to do the installation, everything with a single command. Then when you are using Docker, right, we don't want to use just for stage deployment or production deployment. You also want to use for your development whenever you are writing code and all. Then another thing is the data population, the problem that I said, right? People were connecting to the MySQL DB, Kafka, because of setting up for stuff. So we want to populate the data also. We want to create the tables, we want to create the indexes, whatever is needed, and populate some sample data. So that also needs to be done in this single command also. Then we want to look at the networking. One another problem with the microservices is that when you have six microservices working on your local machine, you have to specify port of each of them, and they can't collide with each other. You have to, if they are working remotely, you have to specify the IPs of all of them. So we want something that networking should be handled itself by the Docker Compose itself. So the host names must itself resolve to the whatever IPs is needed. Then we will look at debugging with containers. So obviously when we are doing development with Docker, we want to also attach a debugger to it. We don't want to uh, lose away that benefit. So we'll look at all these things. So let's look at the kind of service we are kind of system we want to build, right? So suppose this is a sample app I have created. So first is the know it all service. So what know it all service does is that it's a know it all. It keeps saying some things that no one even has asked for. It keeps giving information. You can think something like a Sheldon Cooper. So this is the location service. So what location service does is that it connects to the MySQL database, but it has a Redis cache in between. So our sample app will have a very simple logic that given a city, what is the state? This is the example problem. So given a city, suppose if the city is Surat, it belongs to the state Gujarat. So we want to query this from the database, but we want to have cache in between because we are not, so that we are not making lot of query calls. So now we have this problem setup where you have a cache, you have a MySQL database, you have one service, you have two services, and all of them are communicating with each other. And you don't want people to install all of these in their machines to get this initial service up and running. So let's look at the location service code first. So let's look how the code looks like. Then we will go into what the things are needed. So if you look at the entities, this is a city entity, very simple entity, a city and a state. So this is what we will form in the database, and we have exposed one endpoint. So if we will look at the controller, it's a very simple endpoint. So get state slash state and a city as a path param, and it will return the state. It takes a string, it returns a string. No, we are not doing anything complex here. And this is a Spring Boot application, so all of these things will work. So let's see how the cache is getting in between. So if we will look at the location service, we have this cacheable thing. So it's not an application level cache. We have configured it in such a way that it uses the Redis cache. So if you will look, here is what we have set the Redis config. So for this city cache, we have said that city cache, the TTL should be something or something. This is the Redis source. We are not going too deep into the caching because the agenda of this talk is to tell you more about the Docker compose part, not the Redis cache part. So let's just suppose that some there is a cache in between. So now we have all of these things set up, and now we want to create a Docker file so that we can build everything out of this. So first let's see the Docker file, Docker file is something, it tells you the set of instructions given some base image. Suppose it's a Ubuntu image, you did some installation or something, you modified some files, so you add some final file. So you gave what is your base image. So this is the Gradle image. So what this image was in term was built on some another image. So it was maybe built on Linux on top of someone installed Gradle, and then they published this image. So you started with this Gradle image. So what you did was you copied the files that you need for building. So one would be the build.gradle, because if you will look at it, right, build.gradle is what specifies the properties, dependencies and all. Then you will also obviously need your source code. So what you are doing, from your local machine you are copying the source code to the container. So container is your virtual image that you could think of. So you are copying all the necessary files to your Docker container. Then what do? You run the command. So whatever command you would have run locally, you could run that command there. So this is what we are doing, docker build minus no daemon. So we are running this build command, and if you look lot of this jargon, this all to enable the caching, so that if you are building again and again, you are making some changes in your code, the container doesn't start from the scratch. It can cache whatever it has already built, and it will start right from there. So the builds are very fast, your iterative builds are very fast. And this last thing is the command. So command is that after you have built all your image, how do you want to run it? So you would run it something like java minus jar application.jar. So whatever the jar has been built here, right, it's just running that jar. So this is the part. So but our application also needs Redis and MySQL, right? So this thing is fine. Let's look at another service. So we had this know it all service, right? The whatever we discussed, it was location service till now. So let's see how the know it all service is calling it. So if you will go to know it all service, right, we have this yak service. So what it does is every second it calls so this is our location service host. We provide this in our configuration, and this calls on our 8080 port and slash state and question mark city. So it's our path param, and for this city it gets the class from this location service, and it will print it. It's a very simple service, no open API, no complex contracts. It gives a string, it gets a string. So it will also have a Docker file, and it's identical to the Docker file that you saw previously in the location service. Now we have a Redis database, we have a MySQL database, we have two services. We want to compose everything in one file so that we can get everything up and running in a single command. So that is why we defined a Docker Compose. So Docker Compose is different than Docker file. You can think as Docker file is an atom and Docker file is a molecule. So the molecule is built up of all the atoms. So if you look at it, we have defined all the services. One is the Redis service. So it starts from a Redis image. So these images are already pre-published. So someone took a Linux, they installed Redis on it, and they published that image, and we are directly using it. So here we are exposing the port. So Redis runs on 6379, and we are exposing it to our local machine. Similarly, what we do is we run the MySQL machine here, and it uses, if you will look at it, it uses docker/db.docker file. Let's look at this db.docker file, right? Now what it's doing is taking MariaDB is MySQL DB, and it's taking populate.mysql. So whatever service it will need, right? The database, the tables, we want database and the entries that we need to populate it automatically. So that is what we are defining in populate.mysql. So if you look at it, populate.mysql, how it looks, it's very simple table. Create table if not exists, a city, and insert into cities, and inserting some simple entry. So what it's doing is it's taking a standard MySQL DB image. It's running this query populate.sql inside this DB, and it's creating a new image out of it. So this DB is now fine-tuned to our location service use case. So let's go back to our Docker Compose. So yeah, so we have specified what is our MySQL password we want to set. So it's 1234567, and what is the database we want to create, and the port is also exposed similar to Redis. So since the MySQL runs on 3306, we will expose it to our system in similar way. Now let's come to our most important service, location service. So our location service has specified the build.docker file, the Docker file that we viewed here, right? This is the Docker file we specified. We provide the container name, and there is one line that we have provided. We will look at it, that this will be useful for our debugging purposes, attaching the debugger, but let's ignore it for now. And we are exposing the 8080 port because our service is running on 8080 port. If you look at the application.yaml, right, we have this server running on 8080 port, and it depends on Redis and MySQL. So this service won't start till the Redis and MySQL are up. So we don't want to fail it, right? That's why we will wait for Redis and MySQL to start. And if you look at the connection parameters, from the networking side, we don't provide 127.0.0.1 or anything. We just provided the host name MySQL, and it will automatically resolve to whatever the IP is needed. Similarly for Redis, we specify the host simply as Redis. So now that we have provided the Redis port or Redis host also, so it knows which machines to connect and all. So let's come to know it all service. So know it all service, it depends on the location service, so it can't operate independently, and it has its own Docker file. If you look at, one thing to note here is the context. So what's happening is that it's going up to the parent directory, and it's going to the know it all service directory. So if you look at the location service path, right, this is the location service part. If I do, it's a pwd repos blog, and it will go ls /, know it all service. So it will go back and it will find the Docker file there. So that's why we have this context here, and it will find the Docker file. And similarly, we have a container name like this. Similarly, we have exposed the debugger ports here and the service ports here. So we have looked at lot of code. Now let's get the code up and running. So how do you get all this up? So I promise you that it will be a single line command, right? So I will be spot on my promise, and let's see. So this is the command docker compose up -d --minus build. So let's look at the options here. So -d is the detached state. So once you get the service and up and running, when you do control, when you want to run the next command, so you want to run all of these things in background. So the -d is for detached state. Then you have this build thing. So this build command is, if you have made some changes, if you specify -minus build, it will look at the code changes and it will rebuild the containers if needed. If you haven't made any changes, you can just say docker compose up -d. You don't have to specify the build parameters. So since I have already built this, let's do docker compose of -d. And if you look at it, right, it has started creating all the containers. So if you look which containers are there, it has created a location service MySQL. So these are MySQL instance. It has created Redis. It has created know it all service dev and location service. So all the services are up. But it is just showing it here. How do we validate if it has actually started or not, and how the logs look like? So this is how we look at the logs. So first of all look what are the running containers. So we will do docker ps. So how do you do ps aux, right, in your Linux machine? This is the docker ps for all the running containers. So let me open it in another window, docker ps. So if you look at it, this is the image. The images that have been created and the containers have been created. So this is the name of the containers: know it all service dev, location service dev. So let's look at the logs of location service dev. Okay, docker logs -f. So -f is follow. Similarly what we do in tail. So location service -f dev. So if you look at the logs, the application has started and it has done completed initialization and all, right? So the application has started here. Let's look at the logs of know it all also, right? It's every second it was calling a location service. Let's see if it's able to successfully call or not. So location know it all service dev. So if you will look at this, right, it is printing a new line every second. So every time it is querying the location service with Surat, and it's getting Gujarat in part in response for it. We also want to fiddle with the database. So let's try to connect the database also. Since it's running inside container, how do you connect with it? So let's open our SQL Pro. This is my localhost IP. Since we have exposed this 3306, now we will be able to use it here also. So our DB is location DB, and let's do the connect. And you will see that whatever populate SQL we had written, right, populate.sql, it has inserted that entry, it has created that tables 0 Surat Gujarat. Now let's look at the Redis logs also, right? So you can go inside a container and run some command also. So how would we do is that exec. So if you look at it, this is our location service Redis. This was the name of our container, and we are running this command inside it, Redis CLI monitor. So what this command does is that it looks at the Redis cache and it logs whatever requests are coming to it. So let's run this. So see, it's getting a cache hit, right? Every time this service is calling, there is a MySQL, there is a Redis in between. So it's creating this entry with this key, and it's the cache is getting hit. So we can see that our Redis is also working fine. So if we want to manually hit this service from our database, from our web browser, so how we will do it is that we will go to our Chrome browser, and let's do localhost 8080 and Swagger UI. So the service that was running, right, since we have exposed the 8080 port, we can access all the APIs inside it. So this is our location container. if you go to city and just let's try it out, city Surat, execute. So we have got a Gujarat response. Now let's try to hit with something that is not there. So let's do Delhi. So it will throw a 404 because that is something that is not in our database. So these are the parts, and let's see if we have missed anything. So we have looked at the networking, right? We don't have to specify the IPs. Okay, the IPs we can give the host names only. And let's look at the debugging, right? Now suppose some problem has come. Let's take at this problem only, that we hit Delhi and we don't know that why it's coming 404. So we want to attach a debugger, right? So how would you attach a debugger? So how would you do it is that let me make another configuration for you. Edit configurations, and I will remove this thing and we'll create afresh. So how we will do is that we will create a new configuration, remote JVM debug. So let's name it Docker debug. And what we'll do, this for 5005 port is fine. If you have multiple services running, we have given different ports to it, 5006, 5000, just change this port and you will be good to go. So let's do apply here and close, and let's start our debugger. So you can see now that our debugger has started and it has attached to it, and since we had applied this debug point here, the service has stopped here, and we have got this debugger. And if we try to look at how the city, how the variables are looking, everything, the city is Surat, location service, you will be able to view all the variables. So normal way how do you do debugging, right? Let's stop our debugger to continue our service. And yeah, so that's basically the way you can connect to multiple services since you have 5005, 5006 ports running. Auto data population we have seen, and Docker developments. So let's try to make some change and see how easy it is for it to reflect. So since we don't have anything in our local setup, we will do some change here. So for city, right, now this call won't work for uppercase things. So let's do this thing, city info state city, string dot to lowercase, string dot to lower, okay, city to lowercase. Okay, so previously let's see that it will give a 404 for Surat because we have not handled the okay, I think it's handling for this thing also. Anyway, but if we do this change, right, suppose if we did some change here, city dot to lowercase, and now we want to again test our changes. So how we will do is that docker composer -d, and now we will do the build parameter because we have made some changes. So it will start running. If you could see, right, docker ignore, it would have picked lot of things from the cache, it won't build everything. So everything has been cached, right? If you can see, the things have been cached. It's running the new, okay, I will try to move it a little here, and it's doing the build process. Java build has been successful, and it has the things that were already running, right, it won't recreate it. So MySQL, there is no change. Redis, there is no change. Since location service dev was changed, it's recreating this thing. So let's wait for it to recreate, and I think we may have done some changes in know-it-all service also. So it has been recreated, so it has been started. All of our services have started. So if we have made changes in 2 services, now we don't have to do independent building, so it will all run in one thing. Let's look at the logs also. Know-it-all service there. Okay, so I think it has stopped, it has started breaking because no, it has not started breaking. So that is part of Gujarat, so everything is working fine right now also. So I think that was all for today's talk. Hope it will help you all.